Welcome. I'm Jeanette, the North Dawn coach, and today I want to continue the conversation that we have been having around what it looks like when you are mid to later career. You've had a successful run of a career so far. You've had the meets, the exceeds expectations on the performance reviews. You've been happy and excited, maybe at times more excited than others, but the general trajectory of your career has been one of success and satisfaction. And all of a sudden, much to your dismay and surprise, you're in a season where it doesn't feel like that at all. In fact, it's quite common to be, Sunday afternoon into the evening, feeling like actually maybe that's the most terrible part of the week because you're looking at the end of the weekend time and back into the work situation, the work week ahead, and the dreadful interactions that you're anticipating related to somebody who should be on your side, who should have your back, your manager. And for whatever reason, and I'd say not because of any mistake on your part, you will find yourself reporting to what we describe as a toxic or a very dysfunctional manager, one who certainly doesn't have your back, one who has essentially broken down and eroded your confidence in your own skill set, so much so that you're thinking, I don't know if I can go fix the situation or find something else similar to it. And what I want to offer to you is that's very valid to be feeling that way. In fact, it's a quite common experience based on the number of career coaching clients that I have coming in with that circumstance. And it's something that we can have hope around. We can fix it. You can come back into what was more the earlier experience of your career, not the current experience. There is hope there, even if you're saying, hey, I'm late career, I'm worried about ageism, all of those sorts of things. Yes, there are valid things to consider in that regard, and we can address that. And it's not going to hold you back, and there's no reason to feel this level of dread, angst, anxiety, etc. that you're feeling right now. And so today, as I have been in these videos where we're addressing kind of individual parts and pieces of this whole experience, what I want to talk about is when you're taking that step forward and looking at other opportunities outside of your current organization and experience, what are a couple of things that you want to think through related to that sets you in the best position moving forward? And so on that topic, because you're going to be in this space, you may not feel ready for it today, but when you're in I've put my resume out there, I've done my networking, and now I have some opportunities, and somebody has invited me into a conversation around a particular opportunity. The first thing that you want to think about is, how am I going to position the current experience? Because one way or another, you're going to be asked about it in the process. It takes the shape of various different questions, but it's essentially like, why us, why now? What's the reason that you're interested in this opportunity when you have this thing over here? Because the basic assumption that we're making here is that you're currently employed in the dysfunctional, toxic manager situation, and you're simultaneously looking for something else. So the something else is going to want to know, why are you leaving that experience? And as much as it would feel so therapeutic to unload about how terrible it is to report to your manager, what a micromanaging, sort of crazy situation you're in, this is not the time and place to do that. This is the time to be very controlled in setting the narrative around why you're making this change. And the reason is that they don't know you. They don't have trust built up so far. And so from the employer or the potential employer's perspective, they're looking at risk mitigation. They're looking at, is it terribly risky to consider this candidate? Or, hey, there's very little risk to it. This candidate is going to be a great fit for us in the organization. So obviously, we want to be on the side of, hey, there's very little risk at all. I'm a great candidate. You're essentially lucky to have me in consideration for this role. And so the way that we do that, if you think about it from the perspective of the person who's interviewing you, is not to set doubt in their mind about like who said, kind of the he said, she said sort of a scenario, right? Like, who do they believe? So if you go too far in the narrative around the craziness of your manager, they might start to wonder, what's the real story here? So that means that you want to have a very crisp, controlled narrative to describe what's causing you to leave. So it would be best if you could think of something that doesn't even involve your manager, or involves saying something about that that's so neutral that it doesn't cause the other side to start thinking about, okay, what's the risk involved in that? So it means keeping that clean, keeping that small, not a big answer, but very controlled. On that note, when you're thinking about your specific scenario, if you're coming up blank with what to say there, I'd be happy to do a little bit of brainstorming with you. I'll put a link in the description box to schedule some complimentary time to do that. But essentially, it's about keeping that very controlled, not focusing on the negative of the manager relationship, but focus on a positive aspect of, it's time for me to make a shift. I'm really excited. And, ABC particulars of what you're excited about in the next opportunity, and move on from there. So that's point one about the interviewing scenario that I particularly think is an important aspect if you're coming out of this, I have a toxic manager relationship. The second thing is to think about the interview not so much as a one-way. They're interviewing me and I give answers and then they assess whether I'm a good fit. Yes, all that is going on. And it's a two-way version of that, because just as much as they're assessing you for a fit, you're assessing them. You want to know, if I make this move, how do I mitigate my risk that I might be stepping into something equally as bad or maybe even worse than the situation I have in my current circumstances. So when you come into that process with that mindset of, yeah, I'm doing my due diligence here, it's not just about, can I get the job offer? It's, do I want the job offer? Do I want to risk joining this team, this organization, this particular manager? So when you start to think about it from that perspective, and you consider that there's likely going to be multiple interviews in this process, how can you sort of do a little sleuthing? How can you be a detective in the process to gather both the evidence that this would be a good move for me, or evidence of like, I'm not sure. I think I might need to check that out a little bit more. And one thing I'd offer on this point is the direct questions that you ask, like, are you a micromanaging manager? Are of course going to get you the responses that we know are correct. Absolutely not. I am not a micromanaging manager. I never think about that. No, you don't want to ask those kind of questions straight on, because people know what the right responses are. So you're going to look for the evidence of, does that seem like it exists or not? So think about your current situation. Where does it feel like, if the dysfunctional, toxic nature of your manager shows up in micromanaging, what does that exactly look like? Does it look like multiple one-on-ones a week, a lot of control and check-in? Well, maybe you want to ask a question around, how do you keep touch base or, with your direct reports? What's your process around that? And start to weigh those things out. So what you're looking for are questions that can bring about like the evidence, the either that it exists or it doesn't exist. So the signs and symptoms of it versus like the direct questions are what we're looking for there. Again, I can help you brainstorm some of those for your particular circumstances. Just look for the link in the description box. All right, there's so much more we could talk about when it comes to your toxic manager and the steps out of there. And I'm trying to get into a little bit more of the details, the weeds of that, to make it much more actionable as you move forward. So hopefully that was helpful for you today. I'll be back again next week. And in the meantime, have a lovely week ahead. Do take care. Thanks for watching.